Okay, if I had a gavel, it would help. Okay, we'll start. We're on page 45. Unless somebody's got questions prior to that. I'm just amazed to see everybody already here. Of course, I came a little late. We were dealing with the two opposites called capitalism. It's something that Dr. Waters had done a lot of work on, distinguishing between productive and anti-productive capitalism, which is actually a false or perverted form of capitalism. We talked about monopolies. I think I mentioned briefly in response to a question about the validity of the patent. Point number 4 is usury, which has, we're on page 45C4. Usury has driven scholars mad forever because it was always something that was understood to be trying to get interest on money. And of course, everybody does it. So the problem was, how on earth could it be licit to do that today when it was roundly condemned by the scholastics during the medieval period? And so it's a little bit hard to understand, except that one must understand that there's been a shift in the function of money. The original idea of usury was trying to get gain with no labor and no risk for something that doesn't bear fruit. The initial example was if you loaned somebody a bottle of wine and then you demanded more than the bottle back. This was considered unethical. You needed to return the bottle, but that was it. But what has happened is that the function of money over time exceeded merely that of a medium for barter, as it were. And as we began to understand the function of money in terms of investment of capital and the fact that you are in fact taking a risk, as we all now know, when you invest your money, the function of money was viewed as being different than that for which the original meaning of usury was applied. But we keep the term now and apply it to excessive interest rates, where the interest rate far exceeds any justifiable function of the risk of the money involved in the investment. This, I suppose, is one of those really speculative little footnotes that nobody really cares about anyway. But anyway, that's the story of usury. Under number 5, we're going to look at some examples of ways that you may have anti-productive investment. And remember, anti-productive investment means ruthless investment. Basically, it entails some scheme by which you're not only trying by your own labor and investment and effort to produce a profit, but at the same time you're trying to prevent others from competing with you, prevent others from doing the same thing that you have the right to do, and doing so by illicit means. Here we have a number of examples. Not all of them may right away come across to us as being anti-productive, and we may justly disagree about the exact function of some of these, but the basic idea is that of engaging in some effort to prevent others from exercising their free capacity to invest and to work and to earn money in a legitimate way. Now, the first example is advertisement. Well, heavens to Betsy, everybody advertises. If you don't advertise, you can't be known. But the notion, the problem is whether you are simply presenting how good your product is, or in the process are you tearing down your opponent, your competitor. And good grief, today we see almost all the ads are doing it. They not only say ours is the best, but they also tell you the other guy's is the worst, and they name him and they tell you why he's worse. So this brand X only gets 10 miles to the gallon and we get 20 miles to the gallon. So who in his right mind would buy brand X? And in fact, there are automobile commercials where they actually say, well, I'm turning in my Toyota to buy a Ford. This is really tearing down the opposition. And it's one thing to say that yours is the best on the market, but you don't have to explicitly attack your competitors in order to do this. High interest rates, I'm not really quite sure what they had in mind by this. This is, of course, is Dr. Waters' list, not mine. So if you disagree with it, blame him, not me. But since he isn't here to defend himself, I guess I have to try to. The granting of concessions, of course, basically that means that you're giving favors to people. You're giving some people advantages over others. And that sometimes entails things like bribery of public officials, which of course would be an additional aspect of negativity. Licensing.
Sharking.
Pardon me?
Like loan sharking.
Loan sharking, of course.
High interest.
Oh, the high interest, yeah. Yeah, well, yeah, I guess that would be pretty high interest. And of course, it's illegal. And especially when you threaten to break people's arms if they don't pay you back, or worse. Price undercutting, an example of that was what John D. Rockefeller would do when he would go through Pennsylvania and run into some of these competing oil companies, and he'd tell them basically, you either sell out to me or I'll come in and undersell the product and drive you out of business. Which of course Rockefeller could do because he was big enough to afford to do it. So basically, when you price a product, in principle, you ought to be making a profit. And if you're, now there are such things as loss leaders, as you know. Those are, I would say, legitimate as part of an overall sales program because you're trying to bring people in to buy the rest of your product. That's different than what Rockefeller was doing because there was only one product and he was absolutely undercutting the competition below the level at which they could survive. So it's different than selling your McDonald's hamburger for 15 cents in 2012 for a few days to try to get people to come back and eat your product. I actually sold McDonald's hamburgers for 15 cents. I actually did. My father owned the first McDonald's that was built in Albuquerque, New Mexico back in 1960. But I can't get you any of them for that price today. Takeovers, friendly and hostile. I don't think one needs to dwell on the anti-productive character of hostile takeovers. I mean, what we hear today about people come in and raid another corporation, gets 51% of the shares, control it, take it over, fire all of the people that were working there, or all of the administration. And then, of course, the defense against it is the creation of what's called a poison pill, so that you create a financial device such that if they try to swallow you, it kills them, essentially, in financial terms. So all of these are not really in the spirit of Christian charity. I mean, that's really what we're talking about here. Mergers. Imagine mergers that move in the direction of an unjust monopoly would clearly fit under this category. Bribery, I guess that one doesn't quite pass muster either, and obviously for reasons in itself that would be immoral. Land grabbing describes very well I mean, if somebody's out there and has land, and I guess this would be what happened with the gold miners. Remember when they had the gold mining rush and people would simply steal claims out from other people, sometimes shoot them, which made it easier to steal it. That market manipulation, good grief, we have enough people who've done that. One thinks think of the Hunt brothers, who tried to corner the silver market in 1980, was it? And they drove the price of silver up from probably something like $2 or $3 an ounce up to $50 an ounce because they bought all the contracts. And they had the entire market. If you wanted to buy, you had to buy from them, and they kept bidding it up and up and up. And then, of course, the remedy, if this wasn't bad enough, the remedy was the government went in and changed the rules of the game halfway through the project. and destroyed the Hunt brothers, driving the price back down. So one has to wonder at times about the ethics of the solutions that government lawyers sometimes impose to remedy these problems. So obviously these are ways that capitalism can be misused. Speculation, I think one has to be cautious here. If one talks about creating monopoly, I keep thinking of the first example that I heard of was that of, I believe it was Thales. Yeah, he was the one who said that everything's made out of water, and some people suspected he had water on the brain. And for that reason, in order to demonstrate that he really was intelligent, that philosophers could do something besides simply speculate in that fashion, he went out and bought up all of the grape presses, the wine presses, in the off-season, so that when it became time for the people to press their grapes, they all had to go to him, and he had a monopoly on it, so he made a killing, proving that he was more than simply a speculative philosopher.
I think, too, he could foresee a bumper crop of grapes, too, that's what Dr. Waters used to say.
Yep.
Part of the story is...
Yeah, it's a good story, but it raises a question about the ethics of our founding philosopher in Greece. So, diversification, I'm really not sure what's wrong with that. Anybody got an idea what that might entail? I mean, usually that's what you're supposed to do with your stock portfolio to keep from getting wiped.
Like the theaters, the movie theaters, when they owned the production companies and the theaters, and and the oil companies, the same thing. They owned all the intermediate.
That's vertical. That's a vertical monopoly.
Vertical monopoly.
Yeah, you can have horizontal monopoly or vertical. Standard Oil of New Jersey had both.
Okay.
They really had it worked out to a T.
I think the Firestone Company, they bought out some of the trolley lines and so on back in like around 1950 because they wanted to promote the sale of tires and cars, and people had to drive cars. I think they actually, one of the few times that the government actually went after them.
That would seem to work.
Yeah.
Union licensing, well, I guess the words almost tell you where that one's going automatically. And of course, that we clearly have a difficulty with unions in some states today because of the, as you're well aware, the big fight in Wisconsin about the government unions, because basically what you have is the union contributing to the politicians who will get elected, and they in turn are supposed to bargain with the unions on behalf of the people. But in essence, you've got both sides of the bargaining table are the same people. You've got the unions on one side and the union cronies who got elected to office on the other side. And of course, if you, in many cases, another thing that you have take place is arrangements with government that assure that you can get a government contract for a company only if all the employees are union members. And what many people may not know is that the first stimulus that President Obama put through was given only to companies that hired strictly union labor. So if you didn't work for a union, you didn't get any part of the stimulus. So, I mean, there's 1,000 ways to be corrupt if you really work at it. Kickbacks, well, that one speaks for itself. Government-induced scarcity, well, that would refer to the land banks that we had in the Midwest and the West, where people are paid not to grow crops. And I guess that still goes on today, and it may sound, I don't know whether to describe it as sanity or insanity. I mean, there always is a good rationale for what you're doing, but there's something intrinsically counterproductive about telling people, we'll pay you if you don't do something that's productive. If that isn't anti-productive, I don't know what is. And you do have to look at each case very carefully to see whether indeed it is ruthless investment or ruthless control of investment that's taking place. And you can't a priori just say, well, the whole thing is wrong. Speculation itself plays a legitimate role. Yeah, I was going to mention that. I told you about the Hunt brothers and their attempt to corner the silver market. But and we often hear terrible things about the commodities futures. We hear terrible things about the CBOT, the Chicago Board of Trade, the mercantile trade in Chicago. But what many people don't realize is that originated about, 150 years ago, when the farmers were trying to raise crops. And because of the vagaries of the weather, if they raised a big crop and the price of, let's say, corn was selling for $3 a bushel, so they put in 5,000 acres, expected to sell it at $3 a bushel. By the time this acreage came in, the price dropped to $2 and the farmer was ruined. So in order to prevent that, what they were willing to do is they would agree with some other party, we'll sell you 5,000 bushels of corn at $3 a bushel if you will guarantee that you'll pay us when the harvest comes in. Now this benefited the farmer because he could be assured that he wouldn't go bankrupt, he'd get his money, and it also benefited the person buying because he could get what could potentially be a bargain because he's buying it at $3 and it's possible by the time the harvest comes in it's worth $4. Now this was a beneficial, legitimate contract between two parties which served the interest of keeping the farmers in business, and that served the public good. And that's what originated the Chicago Board of Trade. And of course, pretty soon people realized, well, it works for corn, we can do it for wheat and soybeans and rapeseed and cotton and pigs and pork bellies and cattle and a lot of other things. And of course, then people got the idea, well, if it works for all those, what other things could we trade? And so you wind up trading baskets of mutual funds today. So now you can speculate on virtually anything. You can speculate on leveraged agreements that are incredibly volatile. And as we saw in, was it 19, when did we have, it's 2008, I think, that we practically crashed because one small contract was just went belly up, and somebody managed to go in and save that contract, and it saved the whole country. This would seem to be excessive leverage. So the problem is speculation in itself is not necessarily wrong, but it can become wrong if you are cornering an entire market. And that's why what those who oversee the commodities have done is to limit the sizes of positions that people can take. And they have to report how many positions they're taking so that they don't control the entire market all by themselves and create a monopoly that can unduly drive the price up. So it gets very, very complicated. That is a legitimate role of government to make sure that the trading is fair, because you're trying to remove an impediment to the free market exercise. The problem is, as in the case of the Hunt brothers, where the government changed the rules of the game after the game was being played. And of course, that's kind of what they often do, because they'll have margin requirements for a contract which, let's say they're trading silver, and the price of silver gets up to a certain amount, and the margin on it may be only 3, 4, 5%. You might have a margin of $500 to trade 1,000 or let's say 5,000 ounces of silver. It's only $500. So you start accumulating positions. You think you're doing great. All of a sudden, the people in charge of the exchange change the rules and say, oh, the margin tomorrow is going to be $3,000 instead of $500. And all of a sudden, you find you're trading let's say 20 contracts worth one heck of a lot of money, and you have to come up with all this margin or you lose the contracts. People can't meet the margin calls, so the contracts start falling in value, and as they can't meet the margin calls, the contracts fall faster and faster and faster. So what was initially a winning position, ultimately you may wind up finding yourself $50,000, $100,000 in debt. So this is not for the faint of heart, obviously. But the idea that you can change the margin requirements, first of all, having such very tiny margin requirements makes you kind of wonder about the stability of the program. But secondly, to be able to multiply, and sometimes they'll raise the margin requirements 2, 3, 4 times, it just kills the market and kills the people in the market. So the ethics of that is highly questionable. But these are all the ways that capitalism, some of the ways that capitalism can be misused. There are many ways to misuse it, I suppose, as there are people that can think up of ways to misuse it. And what one always has to ask himself is, am I acting for the common good? Am I simply trying to slit the throat of my competitor, cutthroat, as we say, or am I allowing an equal and fair playing field? It has been argued, for example, in some cases, that some companies have permitted competition, nominal competition, just so that they're not considered to be a monopoly. For example, Microsoft. They own the world, but Apple exists. But you see, by Apple being there, Microsoft can get away with not being called a monopoly. But Apple really doesn't control that much of the market. That's the difficulty. So you can have a real monopoly, and you can have what looks like it isn't a monopoly, but in fact it still is a monopoly. And the common good, of course, has to be brought to bear to prevent people from engaging in that kind of behavior. So what we're really talking about, I don't know if it comes up here or later on, but the function of government, we will talk about it later on, the function of government is to remove the impediments to the free exercise of free enterprise. Removing the impediments means sometimes the government has to step in and break up a monopoly. It has to stop people from committing fraud. Good Lord, people commit fraud right and left today. There are companies, supposed companies, I mean, you don't dare respond to anybody for anything because you don't know who you're dealing with at the other end of the line if somebody calls you up. And they can be slightly misleading. I can remember receiving a phone call from some fellow up in Alaska trying to sell me, what was it, options on oil or something. And he starts giving me his spiel, and he goes on, and I'm thinking to myself, he's calling from Alaska, and this was when it cost to call. And so I said, well, geez, I hate to have you keep talking to me because it's costing you lots of money. He said, oh, don't worry about it. I've got all the time in the world. My only concern is what's really in your best interest in giving you a chance at this wonderful investment opportunity. And as he goes on, and I said, well, I really don't have the kind of money that you might be concerned about to invest in this. I mean, I'm a doctor, but I'm not a medical doctor. Click. He didn't even say goodbye. As they say, the first thing you have to do if you're trying to hoodwink people is convince them of your sincerity. And you'll never hear anybody more sincere than a con man. They're the sincerest people you ever heard. So unfortunately, it's very, very difficult, and you have to be very cautious with whom you do business, to put it mildly. There's a lot of people sitting in jail who have done these kind of things, and there's a lot of people not sitting in jail who are still doing them. Okay, yes?
I missed the one about licensing. What others said.
Well, I imagine if you have the power to grant licenses, that is indeed what you have with the cab drivers. Remember, the cabbies get a license, costs $25 down at City Hall, but you want to buy one today, it'll cost you $250,000 for the same broken down cab. I don't know where the profit is, but if the power to license is the power to control things. And of course, that again is where you get into difficulties with the granting of patents and licensing. And one always looks at the drug industry. There's a tremendous amount of money to be made there, and the possession of a patent is literally a gold mine. And it's always a problem as to how do you grant somebody the legitimate benefit for their research and development, and by giving them a patent, giving them 7 years to, let's say, sell a drug before they can have competitors, on the one hand. But on the other hand, you have to be concerned about, well, how do you then allow it to be distributed to other people? One of the things we do with drugs is we let them go generic after, say, 7 years. And I mentioned to you before how the drug companies sometimes try to play games with that, so it doesn't get to be generic. But even when it does get to be generic, what people sometimes don't realize is the generic product isn't always that cheap. Because in order to be allowed to be sold as a generic, they make them jump through the same hoops, many of the hoops, that they had to get the drug licensed in the first place. They have to prove that it's safe and effective and so forth. And in many cases, this is absurd because it's chemistry. It's already been done. All you've really got to do is go in and have some chemists certify that they really are producing the same product. And it doesn't mean that they have to go out and do field testing of the effect of it on people. But because of that, it can cost millions of dollars even to get a generic started. And that boosts the price of the generic.
I'll give you an example here. I had some eye surgery and it required drops for 1 week, all right? And so after I went to the drugstore and I came out with a bill of $95 copay. So I got all upset, so I called the doctor's company because he's got a big business going. And I spoke with the business manager and I said, I don't understand it. He said, oh, you should have talked to the druggist. He could have looked for a generic. I said, no, it wasn't the druggist's fault. I said, you gave me a picture of the drug. You gave me a script. You did not say generic. And I said, I ended up paying copay of $95. Well, after some discussion about that, he kept trying to throw it back to the druggist. I'm getting a check back for $60. So they're using another company's product.
Well,
And I said to him, I think you're getting a kickback. He says, oh, no. He said, the doctors just think this is the better product to use now.
well, they can do that if they want. There's a little box on there that says DAW, dispense as written.
Right.
If they don't check that, then they're supposed to give you the generic.
Right, I understand that, but I think he should have, I said, if you're the business manager, you should know the kind of copays that are being required for this, because it is expensive to some people.
Yeah.
But I just objected to the fact they didn't say get the generic or whatever, they give you the picture, so you make sure you get the right thing. And don't tell me with a $95 copay.
Well, as you watch the evening news, you'll see endless examples of anti-productive investment, which is why we don't need to take more class time on it. I think you get the
So
idea.
beware.
The legitimate capitalism means that people are acting ethically and not just out to make money. I mean, but in today's materialistic society, that's not an easy thing to find, unfortunately. You do find some good people who have good companies, and they're very honest and they really stand by their product and they're giving you good value for your money, and they're not trying to destroy the competition by illicit means. But how many people are doing that, I'm not so sure. And especially when you have large corporations where the only people that are going to rise to the top are the sharks. Enough said. Let's go over to page 46. We got to deal with food tonight. This has to do with food distribution. Now, what on earth has that got to do with ethics? Well, this again, it's one of those distinctions between the a priori and the a posteriori. A priori, this would have to do with population control. It would have to do with things like abortion, sterilization, contraception, because the argument, is the Malthusian argument that goes back to Malthus in the early 19th century, who said that population, he was a minister, he said population increases exponentially, whereas the food production increases arithmetically. And that being the case, we're bound to just overproduce people and everybody's going to starve to death. Now, the interesting thing is he was a minister and he was not advocating anything immoral. He was just observing the problem. But ever since then, people who aren't as concerned about the morals have used this kind of argument to tell us that we are vastly overpopulated, there's not enough food, we're all going to starve to death, we're going to die of pollution. I can remember in 1970 that we were told by 1980 we'll be standing shoulder to shoulder and breathing smog because there'll be too many people in the world. And it was very scary until you got to 1980 and saw it just didn't quite happen. But these kind of scare tactics have been used forever and are used by government agencies, as you know, right now. Every time, I'm sorry, but this is how it cuts. Every time the Democrats are in control of the U.S. administration, we propagandize and support government agencies around the world, putting pressure on other governments to push for population control, for contraception and abortion. And when the Republicans take over, they undo the exact same rules. It has something to do with the Mexico City Agreement. And I can't help the way the politics fall, but that's just what happens. Every time the Democrats take over, they start pushing population control on the rest of the world. You'd think if you lived down in Guatemala, for heaven's sakes, you'd be left alone. Let the capitalists go contraceive themselves out of existence, but leave us alone. But you're not, because they go down there and set up shops through the United Nations and bring in the women and start telling them about all the means of birth control. Nobody worries about the fact these are Catholic countries, and this may be contrary to what the people are taught by their church, because this is an external agency acting through an international agency to foist on them population control measures largely conceived from the United States. And the ones who resist most in the UN this kind of behavior is the Vatican and the Islamic states. Kind of a curious alliance. But at any rate, that's why food distribution we're concerned about. A priori, we know that you ought not be engaging in contraception, abortion, and sterilization. But a posteriori, the argument is given, well, there's enough food in the world. People are going to starve if we don't curtail the number of people. So that's why we're talking tonight a little bit about food distribution and how much of it is, what the situation really is. And again, the main response to this is that things are available. The world has what we need. We're not overpopulating it. The problem is man's failure to use properly the means at our disposal. So that's why it says man's art is the problem. It's a matter of knowing how to use what we have. And these three specialists that are named here are ones that were known by Dr. Waters. One of them, Epiphania Arulo, was a program specialist. Frankly, I'm not quite sure what that is. Dr. Reg Gallup was a food scientist, and I've talked to him myself, and basically he has argued that we waste 80% of the food that we have. And then, of course, the most famous one is Dr. Colin Clark, who is an economist, who has done a tremendous amount of work, did a lot of work in the past, trying to show that we, in fact, are not in the situation described by Malthus. If anything, it's quite the opposite. Our capacity to farm and to produce has so gone up that where you used to have 50 farmers to feed a certain number of people, the same amount can be done now with 1 or 2 farmers. The United States alone could feed the entire world. Contrary to what Malthus says, food production outstrips population growth. It's just the reverse. And that's why it's not a good thing to become a farmer. There just isn't enough room for farmers. We don't need you. Until, of course, we run out of food or do something really stupid and then wish we had our own garden in our backyard. But if it's just a matter of producing the food, we surely can do it. Some of this material is somewhat dated, but let me just run through the main points here, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. Only 1/15 of the arable land is in actual use. Crop rotation preserves land. I mean, we've had this before, back in about 1800, that when they thought, there's no way we can produce enough food to feed the people. And then all of a sudden, somebody came up with a green revolution. It didn't mean what it means today, but the idea that you could rotate crops. And good grief, all of a sudden, this created so much food that the population increased. It encouraged people to have more children, as a matter of fact. And then, of course, we have the famous Dr. Paul Ehrlich and his population bomb. He's still around, reprinting and republishing things, but he first was known in 1970 with his publication of the population bomb. And of course, it was a book designed to scare the wits out of anybody. If you take 2 houseflies and let them mate unrestrictedly, within a month you'll be up to your neck in houseflies all around the world. And what many people didn't realize about Dr. Ehrlich is that his specialty was entomology. He was a bug doctor. And indeed, in the insect world, that's how population growth occurs. It really does. But you have to take into consideration the fact that there aren't just flies in the world. There's also some things called frogs. And frogs have a tendency to eat flies. So, in point of fact, we're not up to here in flies. And that's just one example, but you certainly have an interaction. And in fact, if you look, let's see, is that thing working? Thank you for this. If you look at the population, the way population works, about 1970, the population going back, it's dry, back to way ancient times, would come up to about like this. Let's see, this is 1970. In other words, you look at the curve, and it looked like it was taking off exponentially. What Ehrlich did is he simply continued the curve upward so that population looked like it was just going to go off the planet. If you have an exponential curve. But the problem is, you couldn't tell where the curve was going at that point in time. The people who are the real experts on population growth in advanced societies are not the entomologists. They're pretty good with bugs. But the people who know more about population growth in advanced societies are the economists. The economists. And the economists will tell you that if you look at the curve that occurs, in fact, in a developing country, it will go up like this, and at this point, it will flatten out. I think that's called a logarithmic curve. It tends to flatten out over time. I'm not getting into the question of why it does it, but the fact is, this is why Ehrlich was fundamentally wrong in suggesting the population was going to just go up exponentially. He was applying the wrong curve. And we didn't have enough data at the time to determine it.
Plus, you got a lot of help with the press.
Well, yes, of course. The liberal press just loved him and allowed him to propagandize unlimitedly. so that everybody was being scared to death. Like I say, in 1970, we were told by 1980 we'd all be standing shoulder to shoulder wearing gas masks. And, that's when we were being told Lake Erie was being polluted beyond redemption. And you could drive around and you'd see the smog hanging in the air everywhere over the Great Lakes areas. But the fact is, since that time, we've pretty much cleaned up Lake Erie, or it's cleaned itself up, and you don't see the smog hanging all over the place anymore. Yes, we have introduced technological advances to correct some of this. We've put in controls on smokestacks to take the particulates out, but very effectively. And the fact of the matter is, it's in everybody's best interest to do this. But it doesn't mean that you should start curtailing the rights of the family. You're supposed to use the technology that you have to solve these problems. One of the things that Colin Clark did was to take all of the geography, all of the area in the whole world, and calculate the ability of each part of the land to raise food. And he'd fold it in. If it wasn't as arable, he might fold it in 4 or 5 times to get the equivalent of a standard unit. And by working this out for the entire world, so obviously, some places are deserts, and then you can't grow much there. So he took that into account. But based upon, even at that time, our ability to grow food, we had estimates from people like himself that you could probably feed 120 billion people. We've only got, 7 billion right now? There's a lot of work that was done on that. As far as India, a good example, again, about 1971, they were starving. Of course, one of the problems that they have in India is they've got all the rats running around and the cattle running around that are sacred. You can't eat them, or the monkeys. They got the monkeys who don't even behave well. But they introduced fertilizer around 1970 and went immediately from being a net importer of grain to a net exporter of grain, despite having the same number of people. The real problem economically in places like India and China, as pointed out here, is the economic system. Socialism is inefficient. Communism in China is inefficient. And the proof of this, of course, as you now know, since that time, the Chinese have gone capitalistic, and they're growing in leaps and bounds in their capitalist economy. Hasn't reached out to the backcountry fully yet, but now they're beginning to drive cars when they previously were on bicycles. So man doesn't have to indefinitely suffer, and it's not a question of the number of people, it's a question of using the means of technology properly. In Starvation or Plenty, there's 2 books by Clark you should be aware of: Starvation or Plenty and Population Growth, The Advantages. I'm trying to figure out what he means here. By 39.9 people per acre in California would equal the world's population. In other words, you could take the whole world's population, put it into California, and only have 40 people per acre. But and one last point, because I want to save time to do some other material here. One of the problems the communists had in the USSR was Lysenko was allowed to teach his form of agriculture, and he was using Lamarckism, which is a false form of biological concept. They imposed this upon the Soviet people and ruined the agricultural economy, which led to starvation in the USSR. Totally unnecessary. So, if you want to really destroy a population, you can do it simply by not using the best means of caring for it. But the whole idea that man doesn't have the wisdom or capability to make advances without restricting, curtailing, and denying the natural rights of the family. This, of course, is ethically wrong, but it's also functionally wrong, even a posteriori. I want to introduce a concept that isn't exactly here. Some of it's hinted at, but we need to talk about the concept of population density. Population density, because as far as the world propaganda is concerned, we are always taught about the hundreds of millions of people in places like India and China where the people are starving, or at least they were. I'm not so sure you can say this of the Chinese because of what their economy is now doing. But we were taught that they were starving because there were so many people, and the Chinese themselves were obviously concerned about it because they introduced this one-child policy, which is brutally anti-natural law, where they're even dragging it for a while. I don't know if they're still doing it. They had horrible cases where people would have 2 children. The authorities would come in and kill one of them. They did this in front of a whole village once. They took a child out and just killed it because you had more than one child. But be this as it may, this notion that there's too many people there, too many people in India, too many people in China, is a complete misunderstanding of what's going on there. You have to look at the area. You have to look at the area, the amount of arable land compared to the population. And I picked up some statistics, which, in fact, they date from 1999, but they're close enough, and the relative numbers will be helpful, because they tell us that the number of people in these countries is not the primary problem. If you take a picture in New Delhi at high noon, of course you're going to see a lot of people crowded together, but you'll also see the same thing in Times Square. And we don't think the people in Times Square are starving yet. The real problem is this. If the people are starving because there's so many of them crowded together, what about those poor people that live in the Netherlands? Do you see how many of them are starving? Don't have access to beer and sausage? No, it's really a terrible situation. You don't understand what's going on till you look at the population densities, and this is from 1999. Let's start with China. The population density of China, that's the number of people per square mile, is 134. I have 134 people per square mile. India's worse. India's got 336 people per square mile. Terrible, terrible. Then we have the Netherlands. They are 466 people per square mile. Obviously, all starving to death. In fact, the interesting thing is that if you look up population densities on the internet, you'll see a listing, if you get the right page, of the population density of every geographical unit in the world, starting with Macau. The population density of Macau is 20,824 per square mile. How many of those people have you heard are dying of starvation? I mean, that's pretty bad. I think the population density of New York City, I hate to even imagine, and all those people are starving. I mean, they're stacked on top of each other, aren't they? High rises, Empire State Building, and so forth. The second most dense spot on Earth is Monaco, 16,486 per square kilometer. Did I say square miles? These are square kilometers. All square kilometers. That's even tighter. And you know how the poor people of Monaco are in rags. Hong Kong, number 3, 6,571 per square kilometer. Hong Kong, Hong Kong is thriving. Coming down the list here, the United Kingdom is number 49, 245 per square kilometer. Oh, I gotta put Poland in here too. Poland number 81, 127 per square kilometer. That's almost as bad as China. China's number 74 at 134 per square kilometer. India is number 33 at 336 per square kilometer. Switzerland, you know how bad things are in Switzerland. That's number 59 with 183 per square kilometer. And then, of course, we come to the United States, which is 172nd, and it has 30 people per square kilometer. Costa Rica, number 122 with 73 per square kilometer. And I mean, that's where, when I look at the retirement literature, they keep telling people that's where to go. And then you finally have Australia, number 230, with 2.5 people per square kilometer. There used to be 3, but Dr. Waters moved here. So you have to readjust your thinking. Don't ask how big the country is. Don't ask how many people, millions of people live there. Don't ask how crowded their big cities are. Ask, what is the population density? And if you think in those terms, Western Europe generally is very densely populated, and yet it's one of the most advanced places on earth in terms of the well-being of people. And some of the places with the least population, some places in Africa that are very sparsely populated, the people are in terrible shape. They have nothing. They don't even have wells for their villages. So it isn't a question of the population density. It's a question of the means of productions, it's a question of the technology in use, and it's a question of the economic system in use. Capitalism beats the daylights out of socialism and communism because government-run programs just don't work terribly well. And if you doubt it, all you got to look is the birthplace of democracy, Greece, which is the perfect, textbook case of why socialism doesn't work. And for some crazy reason, half the population of all these countries still is flirting with it. And of course, the United States gets to make its choice in November as to whether we want to follow the direction of the European socialists or whether we want to return to more of a free enterprise type of economy. Now, there's a couple more points, and let me pick up a couple here. At the density of New Jersey, you could put the whole world's population into Texas and Arizona. Just some of these comparisons help. And that would be with the rest of the world being fed completely by the United States and fed better than it's fed today. Now, these things vary because we have calamities, we have dust bowls and things like that. But mankind is capable of adjusting and does so. I was surprised in looking at this list that nobody lives on Midway Island. We fought one of the biggest battles of World War II over Midway Island. Nobody's there. Sometimes they would put a little government representative temporarily.
We did, of course, we did occupy Midway during the war.
Yeah.
And Admiral Kane, Richard H. O'Kane, skipper of the tank, he records in his book, his memoirs of life on the tank and so on, they were growing vegetables. That's a desert island. They were growing vegetables with desalinated seawater and fertilizer, locally produced fertilizer. And
We have hydroponics. We can do this.
Yeah.
We can grow anything and nothing practically if we really want to do it. But, people are first talking about, they're counting heads, there's too many people. The world is not overpopulated. There is no population explosion. And as I mentioned to you earlier this year, every country on earth is now procreating below its replacement level, excepting for about 5 countries in West Africa. The only reason that your population is still increasing is because we are in a temporary bubble. Because in 1900, the average life expectancy was 47. Today it's something, I'm talking about the United States, today it's something like 77, is it, or 79? And largely we have eradicated the childhood diseases. And we've gotten people to be very healthy, by and large. And they're living to ripe old ages. A lot of people are living to be 100. So we got all these people into the system, and they're getting older and older, and we're still having new ones being born. The older ones are not dying out as that fast for now. And the net result is that the population is expanding and will continue to expand until, guess what? We start dying again. Because believe it or not, we will die. And I don't know what the upper limit appears to be, but it looks like, it might get to 100, you might get to 110, you might get to 120, but there will be a point at which we will start passing away. And when that happens, we'll have the same problem we have with Social Security. There aren't enough people in the bottom of the system to support the older people in the top of the system. It's a Ponzi scheme. And as the young ones, there aren't enough of them, the system breaks down, and that's the big problem China's got. It's an aging population. Their demographers have told them, you've got to abandon the one-child policy, and the politicians there are saying, no, we're still going to do it for some more years. But they got a built-in ticking time bomb. Yes, there's a population time bomb. It's a depopulation time bomb. China's going to implode. They're going to have to try to figure out, what do we do with all these old people without enough young people to sustain them? Places like the United States and some other countries like Western Europe have managed to keep their population somewhat steady by bringing in immigrants, whether we ask for them or not. Having them come in keeps enough young people in the system so it's not totally out of balance. Immigration helps. In the Western Europe, their problem is that many of the immigrants are Muslims. And you can imagine the difficulty they're having in places like Holland, where it gets kind of rather dangerous to the stability of the very politics of the countries. But what is going to happen, I told you about this program that John Stossel put on with, I think it was Ted Koppel, which pointed out you can calculate at the rate that we're not reproducing, because you get below that magic 2.2 children and you don't replace the population. They were putting up on the TV the year in which certain countries will just go empty. Like France, it was something like 2,200. Or no, 2,000.
2020.
What year is this? This is 2012. Yeah, it was 2,200. It was something like that. And Italy, 2140. But the fact that you get at the rate we're going, you can calculate when there just won't be any more people in the country. And if you think it's not impossible, look at Russia. In 1960, they had 200 million people. Today, they got 160 million, and they're scared. And when you once induce people to not have children and inculcate a very materialistic philosophy in them, guess what? It's pretty hard to talk them into having children again. It may not be easily fixable, but our problem isn't overpopulation. So if somebody's arguing with you that you need contraception and sterilization and abortion because we're wildly overpopulated, just laugh at them. They won't believe you, but you'll know why. Okay, we will start with civil authority next time. Thank you.
Sound production copyright Olteen Library Services 2013. All rights reserved. www.aquinasphilosophy.com.